In the silence of Victorian bedrooms, small glass jars stood. They held beauty and slow danger. Belladonna widened the eyes, arsenic whitened the skin, mercury creams removed blemishes, but took away something more. Today, we will quietly open the door to these forbidden beauty secrets and see the price women paid for beauty, never spoken of aloud. Make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, and dive in. Good evening, dear listener. First, take a slow breath and an equally slow exhale. You are now in a quiet place where history whispers memories, but does not hurry. Where the voice of the past sounds so soft that it almost sounds like a lullaby. And before we begin, let me say, I am subscribed to your channel and have already left a silent comment, as if I myself were sitting in the silence before going to sleep and listening to your stories. Tonight, we will open a page of history that is rarely read aloud. Not because it is difficult to understand, but because it has always been a little uncomfortable, a little scary, a little too honest. This is a story about beauty, the kind that was admired in the Victorian era, a beauty that shone so gently, so gracefully, so perfectly, that people preferred not to ask at what cost it was born. Someone saw rosy cheeks, a face as white as porcelain, shining eyes. But no one wanted to talk about anything else. That in the drawers of the dressing tables, next to the combs, the perfume bottles, and the peach powder, lay things that could kill. This quiet world of women's secret medicine cabinets resembled a well-groomed garden, peaceful on the outside, but full of poisonous roots underground. Today we will pull back the curtain, slowly, carefully, without fear, but without romanticizing either. We will walk the path that Victorian ladies walked, where Belladonna lay next to lace and next to a bottle of perfume, the shadow of arsenic. Imagine a Victorian lady's morning room. Dim light filters through the heavy curtains. A coal barely smoldered in the fireplace. The night had left behind the smell of slightly damp wood and coolness. On the dressing table were bottles, jars, bone spoons for creams, eyebrow brushes, a small mirror in a silver frame. But this was no ordinary cosmetics. On the table stood glass bottles with arsenic powder next to them, drops of belladonna and a little to the side, creams with mercury impurities, the smell of which we have almost forgotten today. The woman looked at herself in the mirror. Her skin had to be white as possible. In those days, skin color was a symbol of status. Paleness meant that you didn't work in the sun, that your life was salon interiors, carriages, and evening receptions. A tan was a sign of work and poverty. So women did everything they could to preserve their porcelainess. No one asked questions. No one warned. Beauty was a tacit agreement, a dangerous but desirable one. If you opened a small drawer in a Victorian woman's dressing table, you might find a small bag of powder there. It was velvety to the touch, light, almost white. It was ground arsenic. In very small doses, it made the skin softer and paler. It gave the effect of delicate bleaching, that very aristocratic transparency. The face became matte, smooth, without blemishes. But arsenic is also a slow poison. At that time, ladies knew about it, but pretended not to know. After all, beautiful skin was a necessity. Beauty was a duty, because the world demanded it of them. Some of the doctors would sometimes cautiously hint at the danger. Someone would say, maybe it's better not every day. But most pretended not to see anything, all for the sake of the porcelain imprint that society called femininity. In another drawer, among the bottles, someone might find a small glass bottle with a clear liquid. No label, no explanation. It was a tincture of Belladonna, a plant also called beautiful-eyed. A drop of it was instilled into the eyes to dilate the pupils. Why? Because the dilated pupil created the effect of a dreamy look. The eyes became larger, brighter, emotional. Such a look was considered extremely beautiful in those days. But belladonna caused severe pain, burning, blurred vision, dependence. Large doses could cause palpitations, hallucinations, and loss of consciousness. They knew all this. They hid all this. In ladies' salons, they often joked, "Beautiful eyes require sacrifices." But behind this laughter was silence, a tacit agreement to remain silent about the risks. And at the same time, the slow destruction of the body. Today we associate mercury with thermometers and danger. In the Victorian era, it was associated with cleansing creams. If the skin had spots, freckles, or uneven skin tone, mercury cream promised to erase them, like an eraser that erases marks on paper. And it really worked, at first. The skin cleared up, became smooth. The spots lightened. But mercury penetrated deep inside, into the blood, into the bones, into the organs. It caused hair loss, weakness, insomnia, mood swings, and memory loss. Women complained that they became very tired, that they often felt dizzy, that they lost their appetite. In the Victorian era, a woman was both an adornment and a symbol of family status. She was expected to be perfect, not just beautiful, but a submissive, quiet radiance. Whitened skin, dilated pupils, even blemish-free complexion. These standards were so strong that even mothers advised their daughters to use the right products. By the right products, they meant products that today would be categorized as poison. And yet, women did not protest. After all, beauty was their language, their privilege, their form of social survival. And the price for it seemed acceptable. It was not talked about in women's salons, in families either. It was a secret, half visible, but accepted by all. Just as some people today do not read the instructions for cosmetics. In Victorian times, no one asked questions about the composition of creams. How does it work? Is it safe? What will happen in years? These questions were inappropriate. They destroyed magic. And beauty was one of the few magical things women of that time could afford. So they kept quiet. And the men kept quiet. And the doctors kept quiet. This silence is also part of our history. Imagine a small glass jar, round, transparent, with a polished cork. It stands in the shadow of the dressing table. At first glance, there could be powder or crushed chalky mineral or something completely ordinary. But if you lightly tap the glass with your fingernail, a soft white dust will gather inside. Too soft, too light, too pure. This is ground arsenic, ground to the state of the finest powder. In those days, this substance was considered almost universal. It smoothed out skin imperfections, made the face white as milk, removed redness, masked traces of exhaustion and stress. Ladies applied it the way we apply highlighter or foundation today, in small doses, every day, sometimes several times. This was the main secret of porcelain, as it was called in salons. Arsenic had no odor. It had no taste, in small doses. And the scariest thing, at first it had no visible effects. That's why it seemed so safe. To understand why women chose such a dangerous substance, one must remember what white skin meant in Victorian culture. A white face symbolized high social status, feminine fragility, elegance, delicacy, non-participation in physical labor. It wasn't cosmetics, it was language, a way to tell the world. I belong to the upper class. My time is filled with conversations, salons, reading, and not working in the fields. Paradoxically, women from poor families sometimes also used arsenic to look us richer. Beauty was the only way to rise, even a little. So arsenic became a symbol of hope, although it was actually a deadly substance. But who then thought about death when it came to future marriage, family fate, the respect of society? Let's imagine a lady's morning ritual. Dawn breaks through the curtain with a golden spot. The room is quiet, only the ticking of a small wall clock can be heard. She smiles slowly at her own reflection. Her face has turned a little red after the night. A small spot near her cheekbone disturbs her gaze. She takes a soft brush. She dips it slightly into a jar of arsenic. A touch, a second touch, a gentle movement along her cheek. The spot disappears. Her skin tone becomes even. She looks as if rested. Understanding the effect, women could not refuse it. Arsenic did not only act cosmetically. In very small doses, it increased the heart rate, gave a slight feeling of energy, made the cheeks naturally rosy due to vascular irritation, suppressed appetite, that is, it worked. Like early beauty stimulants. A woman did not just look better, she felt that she looked better. And this made the remedy almost indispensable. As historians later said, the beauty of the Victorian era was dependent not only on fashion, but also on her own body, rearranged by poison. There were special salons where beauticians, often reluctant to admit their craft, sold white powders. None of them said the word arsenic out loud. If a client asked, the artisans would answer vaguely, "It's a natural mineral. It's a purified white powder. It's just cosmetics, my dear." The women knew, but pretended not to know. This silence was a mutual agreement. The Victorian world in general was full of things that were not talked about. Depression, pregnancy, women's diseases, family problems, and cosmetics that could kill. The saddest thing about the arsenic story is that the symptoms of poisoning seemed to be that the body needed a little more. After months of use, constant fatigue would appear, nausea would begin, mild stomach pain would occur, the woman would lose weight, her skin would become even paler than she wanted. Instead of stopping use, the women would increase the dose, because they thought it was fatigue, not poisoning, or anemia, or feminine weakness. Some even took small pills with arsenic, believing that they improved their mood. In hindsight, historians admit, in Victorian England, not only bodies were slowly being poisoned, but also the expectations of society. The most striking thing is that arsenic was not associated with aging, but on the contrary, with youth. Salons even joked, "At 40 you look 30, but you feel 80. It was a tragedy of the era. Women wanted to look young, but it was cosmetics that accelerated their aging. However, the external result was so attractive that no one wanted to give it up. In theaters, powder was also popular. Actresses had to look flawless under gaslight. It emphasized every feature. Arsenic masked everything. Aristocrats used it before balls and receptions. Imagine a carriage driving up to a large house. A lady exits, holding the hand of a footman. Her skin is so white that it seems almost transparent. Everyone whispers, "What beauty! What purity of tone!" No one sees how she sways slightly in the shadow of the carriage, or how later at night she feels nauseous. After all, they expect only one thing from her: to be beautiful. Behind external beauty, women often hid insomnia, weakness, loss of appetite, hair loss, gum problems. These signs were typical of arsenic poisoning, but at that time they were attributed to nerves. If a woman fainted, they said it was too tight a corset. If she lost weight, she keeps herself in shape. If she weakened, women are always weak. Thus, society justified its own demands. Why didn't women refuse? Because the choice was between conforming to the ideal or being considered unkempt. Beauty was a social obligation, just like manners or the ability to keep yourself in the light. Only at the end of the 19th century did doctors begin to talk about the dangers, and even then, with extreme caution. After all, cosmetic companies did not want to spoil the reputation of their products. It took a whole century for the world to recognize the obvious. Arsenic did not beautify women. It took them their health. At that time, female beauty was not only in a light skin tone or a delicate figure. The gaze was of great importance. A lady's gaze had to be dreamy, slightly hazy, large and brilliant, with dilated pupils. This was considered a sign of sophistication, innate tenderness, even emotionality of the soul. But such emotionality was not natural. It was created by a tincture of belladonna, a plant that was also called poisonous beauty. It was enough to drip just 1 or 2 drops into the eyes, and the pupils dilated so much that the eyes seemed larger, darker, shining, deep. This effect lasted for hours. In salons, they said, "You can drown in these eyes." No one added, "And you can also go blind." Because belladonna is not just a cosmetic, it is one of the most dangerous plants in Europe. Let us imagine an ordinary evening in the home of a Victorian lady. On the table are candles. On the wall are soft shadows. She sits in front of a mirror, dressed in a light dressing gown, her hair combed and falling to her shoulders. Next to her is a small crystal-clear bottle. The liquid in it seems pure, innocent, almost holy. She carefully tilts the bottle, dips the glass rod, pulls it out like a thin silver thread that trembles. And then, 1 drop in the right eye, 1 in the left. For a moment, a sharp burning sensation appears, as if someone had briefly lit a candle in her eyes. Tears barely appear. The woman blinks several times, and in a few minutes, her gaze changes. The pupils become large, almost black, and now every movement of light in the room is caught by them, as if the eyes had become the smooth surface of a lake. This is how the beautiful woman, Belladonna, was born. To understand why women so sought this effect, you need to know one thing. In the Victorian era, large pupils symbolized innocence, emotionality, sensitivity, openness, femininity. There was even a belief: the eyes are the windows of the soul. The dilated pupil made the facial expression soft, naive, almost poetic. However, behind the effect was a whole series of consequences. Belladonna paralyzed the muscle responsible for constricting the pupil. After installation, light began to hurt the eyes, vision became blurry, focusing was difficult. A fog appeared before the eyes. Some women began to have severe headaches, others, dizziness. Some, rapid heartbeat, anxiety, even hallucinations. But all this was not a topic for conversation. The women did not share such side effects with each other. They said something like, "It stings a little in the eyes, but the beauty is worth it. It's a trifle. I'm just tired after the journey," as if each was trying to protect her secret. Among aristocrats, belladonna was not just a cosmetic product. It was a symbol of high culture. In cities where evening salons gathered writers, diplomats, and ladies in French dresses, a woman's gaze was supposed to look deep and blurred. This slight blurring created the impression that a woman saw not only the interlocutor, but also something more. Something poetic, unattainable, eternal. In salons, they often repeated, "Eyes are a woman's best adornment." And if there was a bottle of Belladonna next to them, it meant that the woman was carefully preparing not just for the evening, but for public contemplation. This ritual was quiet, intimate, and yet mandatory. Belladonna found its way onto makeup tables in various ways. In the form of pharmacy tinctures, in the form of homemade drops, in the form of mixed eye washes. Some mothers even gave their daughters small bottles for engagements as part of adult life. It was a symbol of growing up, like decorative cosmetics are today. But no one talked about the danger, not even those women who had already experienced it on themselves. It was embarrassing to touch on the subject, as if the woman admitted that her beauty was fake. Therefore, silence was transmitted along with the bottle. After several years of regular use of Belladonna, a woman could experience progressive deterioration of vision, sensitivity to light, weakening of the eye muscles, headaches, rapid heartbeat, nervousness. Some women even lost the ability to see clearly, especially at close range. The paradox: in order to look more beautiful, the woman made the world around her less clear, as if she saw beauty, but not reality. Belladonna gave women a dreamy look, but at the same time made them vulnerable to light. Women often wore veils, not just for fashion, but also to hide the harsh light that hurt their eyes. They said that women were too sensitive, that their eyes were weak, that they were too delicate for reality. No one admitted that the reason was in these drops. Society was ready to accept any explanation, just not the truth. Interestingly, many men of that time did not know about the existence of Belladonna as a cosmetic, or they pretended not to know. They were attracted by charming eyes. They spoke of innocence in the gaze, about tenderness in the expression. But few asked, why are their pupils always so large? This silence held the whole system in place. Doctors of the time knew much more about Belladonna than ordinary people. In medical treatises, it was described as poison, hallucinogen, paralytic of the optic nerves, dangerous antispasmodic. But these treatises were read by male doctors. Women did not have access to them. This created a strange gap. Those who applied the drops did not know the truth. Those who knew the truth did not use the drops. Where there should be dialogue, there was a wall of silence. Belladonna is more than cosmetics. This is a story about how women sacrificed their health in order to meet the demands of a world that expected beauty from them, not truth. Many think that such remedies were only available to the aristocracy. No. Middle-class women bought cheaper options. Mixtures with belladonna juice, aqueous solutions, tinctures diluted with alcohol. They were less purified, but more dangerous. Women applied the drops before church, before a date, before a family dinner. It was a habit, the same as applying eyelash extensions today. It wasn't until the late 19th century that some doctors began to speak out about the dangers. But society didn't immediately listen. It wasn't until several famous actresses lost part of their vision that the product began to slowly be removed from salons. Imagine a Victorian woman's dressing table, a mirror in a gilded frame, a fabric embroidered with small flowers, a powder compact next to a pearl hairpin, a rosette with candles. And in the middle of all this, a small jar of cream. It never had the word Mercury written on it. It was often called cleansing balm, whitening cream, softening ointment, shine cream. The woman would open the jar, The cream was smooth, silky, light white, or pearly, and it often smelled of delicate lavender or rose scents, not hinting at metal in any way. Everything looked beautiful, safe, seductive. This is the main irony of Mercury cosmetics. Under the guise of cleansing was a slow poisoning. In Victorian cosmetology, the action of mercury was appreciated for several reasons. First, mercury destroyed the upper layer of the skin, making it lighter. Second, it suppressed melanin, which actually seemed like a miracle for women who did not want to have a single spot. Third, it killed bacteria, so acne, redness, irritation temporarily disappeared. And this created an effect that today could be compared to a strong chemical peel. After several applications, the skin became lighter, smoother, more even. The woman looked in the mirror and thought, "It works." And that was enough. Let's imagine the evening of a Victorian lady. She sits in front of a mirror. The light of candles cast shadows on the wall. Her face is a little tired after a long day. Red cheeks, a slight spot near her chin, an imperfect skin tone. She opens a jar of cream, dips her fingertips into the cool mass, and slowly, in circular motions, applies the cream to her face. She feels the softness of the texture. She imagines how the cream works, how it erases imperfections. And indeed, in a few days, the spots became lighter, the skin smoother, the color more uniform. That was enough for the woman to continue. Even if sometimes, after application, a slight metallic taste appeared in the mouth, or a strange dryness in the throat, or a slight burning sensation of the skin. They didn't talk about it. It wasn't important. What was important was to look good. The mercury didn't stay on the surface of the skin. It penetrated deep, into the blood, into the tissue, into the nervous system. Women of that time did not know that. Mercury disrupts kidney function, affects memory, causes emotional swings, weakens the immune system, causes hair loss, accelerates aging. The irony was that the cream that prevented skin aging could accelerate the aging of the body. Today it is hard to imagine that doctors could remain silent, but they did. Why? Because cosmetics and medicine were separate fields. A doctor could see a patient with chronic fatigue, headaches, hand tremors, joint pain, depression, memory problems, but he never asked, "What cream do you use?" This may sound familiar. The cream works, people are happy. So why tell them about the dangers? In Victorian England, many brands appeared that promised perfect complexion, silky skin, eternal youth. Nobody listed the ingredients. Nobody checked the dosage. Mercury was cheap, powerful, and quick to produce results. Everyone was a winner, except for the women themselves. Imagine a ballroom. The gas lamps flicker slightly. Women dance in dresses of silk, lace, and tulle. The air smells of perfume, wax, and flowers. Many of these women have a perfect complexion, an almost luminous effect. The light plays softly, evenly on their skin. This is the effect of mercury creams. If you looked closer, you could notice a slight dullness of vision, fine wrinkles near the corners of the eyes like microburns, and sometimes a slight redness after a few hours. Mercury creams worked quickly and effectively, and this created an addiction to the result. Women felt that without the cream, their skin darkened, became mottled, lost its smoothness, looked worse. But this was a lie. Mercury destroyed the skin, and without the cream it became even worse than before starting to use. So women applied the cream again, and again, and again. This vicious circle supported the beauty industry. In addition to store-bought creams, there were also homemade mixtures. Some recipes were passed down through generations. Grinding mercury amalgam, mixing mercury with lemon water, adding mercury powder to bleach. These recipes were considered proven. They were recommended by friends and relatives. But they had no dosage. There was no control. There was no responsibility. Such mixtures could be deadly. Many actresses of the time depended on mercury creams. The gaslighting emphasized every shadow, and the cream literally washed away everything superfluous. But actresses aged faster. Their skin lost its elasticity, their eyesight deteriorated, their hearts became weaker. The newspapers wrote, "Actresses always have a tragic fate." It sounded poetic, but in reality, the tragedy was not in fate, but in cosmetics. Gradually, very slowly, women began to understand that beauty is not about being perfect, and not about being spotless. A new movement began for naturalness, for health, for the rejection of dangerous means. Mercury became a symbol of how far the human desire for perfection can go, and how difficult it is to admit to yourself later that the price was too high. Mercury has left its mark not only on the history of cosmetics, but also on our attitude towards beauty. The Victorian era teaches us that external brilliance can hide internal destruction. That sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that seem innocent. And that beauty is not what you put on your skin, but what you carry in your heart. Imagine a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. A Victorian lady holds it in her hands. She places it on her dressing table, takes out a small golden key that hangs on a ribbon near her chest, unlocks it, and inside is a world that men of that time knew almost nothing about. Women kept everything there that was not for the eyes of others. Creams that contain more metal than rose oil, powders with arsenic, bottles of Belladonna, miniature scissors, tweezers, hairstyling products, thin glass sticks for applying ointments, candles for lightly melting wax masks, bottles of cologne that mask the smell of pain. These items were not part of worldly etiquette. They were part of women's reality, and this reality was successfully more dangerous than it seems to us today. One arsenic, which we have already talked about, in women's medicine cabinets often contained innocent white powders. Lid whitewash, chalk mixtures with ammonia, boron-based powder, the so-called Venetian whitewash, mixtures with zinc oxide, mascara, which even contained crushed chalk with poisonous impurities. They all had one goal: to lighten the bill, to eliminate any color that I want to remind a little of life under the sun. The lighter, the better. Whiteness was social currency. Side effects? They were silent about them. Belladonna was only one of many plants that were sent to women's medicine cabinets. Here you could find opium tincture in microdoses to relieve pain before going out in public. Esperanza, a plant that calmed the nervous system but made a woman apathetic. Belladonna extracts with varying degrees of purification. A pharmacy solution for eye shine, which included herbs but also unknown chemical impurities. Rose water mixed with 8, with which women wiped their faces after creams to consolidate the result. The smell of these products was special, a mixture of lavender, pharmacy herbs, vinegar, and metal. This smell is known only to those who have at least once touched old boxes with women's secrets. In women's medicine cabinets, you could find things that looked better than other surgical instruments. Small needles for piercing blackheads, miniature spatulas for applying creams to the folds near the nose, thin blades for trimming uneven skin, metal tweezers for removing small growths or warts. These were home procedures, which were done without doctors, without sanitation, without anesthesia. One of the most interesting items in women's medicine cabinets were wax masks. These were thin plates of wax, except mixed with honey, oils, herbs, or even mercury. The woman heated the mask near a candle, applied it to her face, and left it overnight. It cooled, tightly fitting the protection, and seemed to pull out her imperfections. In some women's medicine cabinets, one could find things that seemed wonderful. Dried flowers, small bags of herbs, pieces of parchment with inscriptions, beads, ribbons, tiny crosses or medallions. These were not accessories. These were amulets. Women believed that herbs protected against the evil eye, that certain plants softened the protection, that a miniature medallion preserved youth, that one of these objects preserved beauty and drove away misfortune. It was a world where faith and cosmetics lived side by side, where it was sometimes difficult to distinguish what was ritual and what was old belief. For men, it was all women's work, incomprehensible, inessential, almost magical. Only women knew how difficult it was to bear the light, how many products are needed for the perfect look, how painful it can be from the most expensive cream, how embarrassing it was to have a spot on your cheek, how dangerous but necessary it was to use these products. First aid kits were secret because women were ashamed to admit the unnaturalness of their beauty. Men did not consider this a place. Society expected perfection without explanation. Cosmetics were often poisonous and dangerous. Some products were considered immodest. It was not just a set of creams. It was part of women's inner freedom. Women were their own doctors, their own beauticians, their own herbalists, their own alchemists. The combination of pearl powder and mercury cream, tinctures of belladonna and lavender, opium and rosewater, special masks and amulets. All this created a daily female ritual. This was a part of the world where a woman could be herself only in front of a mirror. The world was cruel to women back then. A girl at 17 was a young woman. At 25, she was almost out of luck. At 30, she was a mature woman. At 35, she was a spinster. Social labels were applied quickly, and women learned to hide every trace of time. In this chapter, we will slowly, carefully, and without judgment, touch on the most dangerous aspect of Victorian cosmetology, the ways to hide age, which, unfortunately, often ruined health. Imagine a woman sitting in front of the mirror in her room. She's wearing a beautiful dress, her hair is in a fashionable updo, and 2 candles are burning on the table. She looks at her reflection and notices a thin line at the corner of her mouth. This is not a line of age. This is a line of fatigue, from endless weeks of preparation for receptions, from the cold air, from constant worries. But she sees it as a threat. In the Victorian era, a wrinkle meant you are no longer the center of attention. You are no longer young. You should be more modest. You are giving way to younger people. It was not just a cosmetic defect. It was a social rift. That is why women did everything they could to hide it, even if the products were dangerous. Lead whiteners have been used since ancient times. In the Victorian era, they came back into fashion. Women applied them to cheeks, forehead, chin, neck, sometimes even shoulders. The whiteners created a perfectly smooth surface, which hid wrinkles, spots, shadows under the eyes. But lead dried out the skin, caused it to thin, caused hair loss, weakened teeth and gums, penetrated the bloodstream, destroyed the nervous system. Women complained of increased irritability, insomnia, headaches, strange mood swings, loss of appetite. They were told, it's just female nervousness. No one connected it with bleach. Mixtures based on lead, arsenic, chalk, vinegar, bleach were used to fill in small wrinkles. This was the precursor to fillers, but in a terrible, almost poisonous version. The powder was applied thickly, using soft horsehair brushes. It clogged pores. The skin stopped breathing. The wrinkles did indeed temporarily disappear. But then new, deeper ones appeared, and the cycle repeated itself. The woman applied more powder to hide what the powder itself had created. It was a vicious circle of beauty and poison. In addition to creams and powder, women created a blush using means that today cause eerie astonishment. Cheeks were rubbed with salt, alcohol, cayenne pepper tincture, a mixture of lemon juice and vinegar, sometimes even with fingers heated to warm. These methods artificially caused blood flow to the skin, making the cheeks blush. The result was natural, lively. But the skin after such procedures often became sensitive, dry, and sometimes damaged to the point of microcracks. Women continued anyway, because blush symbolized youth, and no one wanted to look older. In the secret medicine cabinets of many women, one could find cleansing mixtures, prototypes of modern peelings, but they were incredibly dangerous. The composition of such masks included ammonia, citric acid in concentrated form, tartar, sometimes a solution of bleach. The mask was applied to the face in a thin layer and kept for 10 to 15 minutes. It created the effect of new skin because it actually removed the upper epidermal layer. After that, women felt a burning sensation, sometimes pain. The skin turned red, but after a few hours it seemed to smooth out. This was a temporary effect, very expensive for health. One of the most dangerous practices was night masks made of lead whitewash. Lead powder was mixed with cream, egg white, almond oil, herbal extracts. The mask was applied overnight. It dried, forming a hard, slightly cracked surface. In the morning, the skin did indeed look lighter, and fine lines were smoothed. But the lead slowly penetrated the body. And over weeks, months, and years, this night care turned into chronic weakness, impaired coordination, joint pain, memory problems, depressive states. In Victorian society, aging of a woman was taboo. The reasons were profound. A woman's youth meant value to the world. Aging was considered a sign of loss of attractiveness. Women rarely had a social role outside of marriage and appearance. Ageless appearance was part of the ideal feminine image. Older women had much less freedom and respect. Therefore, even the slightest hint of a wrinkle was perceived by women as a blow to their dignity. And they were ready for any rituals to preserve their youth, at least externally. This was not empty vanity. This was a matter of survival. Some expensive salons in England and France offered a procedure that today would be compared to microlifting. A mixture of an alcoholic solution of ammonia, lead whitewash, herbal extracts was applied to the woman's face. This mixture dehydrated the skin, temporarily smoothed it, created a tightening effect. The woman left the salon looking younger. But after a day or two, the skin became tight, sensitive, and sometimes damaged, and the woman returned to the salon again. After all, the ritual of youth was stronger than fear. Aging was not only about wrinkles. Women also hid. Dark circles under the eyes, bruises from corsets, shadows on the face from lack of sleep, slight swelling, a consequence of exhaustion, trembling hands from poisonous cosmetics. Women knew it is worth showing weakness, and society will turn away. Therefore, they created youth, even when their bodies cried out for help. There was an invisible solidarity between women. They exchanged recipes, gave each other advice, borrowed cosmetics, shared means. But they never talked about the danger, never confessed their fears, never admitted that they felt worse. Beauty was a silent agreement, and silence was a protection against shame. Victorian women used to say, "Hands are the first part that gives away your age." And indeed, everything was reflected in your hands. Housework, cold, lack of care, nerves, even your health. Therefore, women did everything to keep their hands pale, smooth, aristocratic, without visible veins, without roughness. The most common remedies. 1. Lemon juice and vinegar compresses. This solution was used to whiten the palms of your hands. It dried the skin, caused microcracks, but the hands became lighter. 2. Lead whitewash masks. Women applied lead cream to their hands in the same way as to their faces. The tone became even, but the skin lost nutrition, cracked, and the lead was absorbed into the body. 3. Mercury ointments for smoothing veins. Mercury really reduced the visibility of veins by destroying vascular tissue. It was a scary but effective method. 4. Night gloves soaked in anti-aging creams. They were worn before going to bed. Inside the gloves was a lead herbal mixture. It really made the skin soft, but slowly poisoned the body. These procedures were performed in silence. The woman sat by the candle, rubbing dangerous pastes into her hands, and thought not about the risk, but about how her hands would look during tea in the daylight. The neck and décolleté area were the part of the body that was visible at receptions, balls, and in the theater. Therefore, these areas had to look smooth, fair, without spots, without wrinkles, without a hint of fatigue. And here women resorted to those means that today would be considered dangerous cosmetic chemistry. Victorian rituals for the neck and chest. 1. A mixture of chalk and vinegar applied at night to lighten the skin. 2. Massage with ointments with mercury. This temporarily smoothed the skin, but caused internal inflammation of the blood vessels. 3. Tinctures of myrrh and alcohol for tightening alcohol dried the skin very much, making it thinner. 4. Wax bandages. They were heated, applied to the décolleté. The bandage hardened and created the effect of tight youth. 5. Night bandages with moist creams. The skin really smoothed after a night under the bandages, but it was just swelling caused by lack of oxygen. The worst thing is that many girls started these procedures at the age of 13 to 14. They were taught, you can't let your neck give away your age. Dresses with open shoulders were in fashion, so this area had to look like a porcelain statuette. Shoulders were rubbed with bleach, chlorine solution, vinegar napkins, lemon gruel, even chamomile alcohol infusion. Special shoulder powders were used for balls, white, silky, light, but almost always with lead. Many women got dermatitis, redness, burning, rashes. But they kept quiet, because the beauty of the skin was valued more than health. The back was often hidden by a corset, but that was precisely why it required care. Camphor rubs to relieve pain, creams for rashes caused by tight corsets, powdering to mask irritation, vinegar compresses. Many women had bruises, abrasions, but they never showed them to anyone. In salons, they said, a woman's back is her secret. In the Victorian era, hardly anyone saw a woman's legs. but women took care of them more strictly than we might imagine. Why? Because the legs carried the weight of the corset, and the corset carried the weight of social expectations. Women used thin ointments to reduce the venous network, vinegar compresses, chalk mixtures for lightening, mercury creams for rashes, water baths with ammonia for lightness. Some of the products caused cramps, but women endured because footwork was the most invisible and difficult. Bathing was not a daily ritual. Therefore, women used vinegar wipes, lemon towels, alcohol wipes, ammonia solution, special bleaching sponges. These products dried the skin to the point of micro cracks. They were followed by irritation, but they created a feeling of cleanliness. The most dangerous was a mixture of vinegar and bleach. It lightened the skin, but could cause chemical burns. Women said, "Beauty should not smell like soap. Beauty should smell like patience." Wealthy women allowed themselves a special ritual: youth baths, which were offered by some salons. To such baths were added milk, ground herbs, vinegar, wine, lemon juice, crushed chalk powder, sometimes a weak solution of mercury. The bath did make the skin soft, but it also dried it, disrupted the microbiome, caused irritation, provoked exhaustion. Women left the bath with the feeling of a new body. But it was deceptive. The corset shaped the body, but at the same time compressed. Ribs, internal organs, spine, nerve nodes. To hide the traces of the corset, women used anti-bruise creams, pain-relieving ointments, powders to mask abrasions. Shoulders were rubbed with camphor, the stomach with mint ointments, the back with rubbing alcohol. It was painful. But society demanded that women be slim, regardless of the reality of their bodies. Armpits and intimate areas were taboo, but well-groomed spaces, not even women's magazines wrote about this. But secret first aid kits contained products for whitening armpits, for eliminating odor, for softening the skin of intimate areas, for cleansing, for hiding irritations from corset strings and underwear. This was care that a woman had to do herself, without advice, without books, without medicine. We have already talked about arsenic, belladonna, mercury, about the body, arms, shoulders. But today, we will touch on the most complex, most painful, and least documented aspect of female beauty of the Victorian era. Attempts to change the shape of the face, to hide defects, to correct what, as they say, nature gave, but did not give generously. In Victorian culture, a woman's face was her calling card, her social status, her future, her market value, her reputation. Facial features were considered almost as a testimony of fate. In magazines and books they wrote, narrow lips, a sign of restraint, a thin nose, nobility, large eyes, tenderness, smooth cheeks, youth, a correct oval, harmony. If something went beyond the ideal, a woman felt ashamed. That is why in secret medicine cabinets and closed rooms, rituals of correcting the face were born. Sometimes very painful, sometimes dangerous, sometimes just strange, but always silent. In Victorian England, the nose was considered one of the main features of female beauty. The nose had to be small, straight, thin, but not sharp, proportionate, without a hump. And if nature gave it otherwise, women resorted to strange and painful methods. Ways to reduce the nose. 1. Rubbing with vinegar and alcohol. It was believed that this would dry out the nose and make it appear smaller. In fact, it simply turned red and flaky. 2. Clay and salt compresses. The clay tightened the skin. Women believed that it reduced bone. It was an illusion, the effect of temporary swelling. 3. Massage with metal spoons. Cold spoons were pressed against the wings of the nose, believing that they made the nose narrower. 4. Bandaging the nose with bandages at night. Some women slept with their noses tied tightly, hoping to change its shape. It was painful, and the results were almost zero. 5. Home surgery on cartilage. The darkest part. In rare cases, women pricked the tip of their nose with thin needles to change the shape of the cartilage. It was dangerous. Infection, inflammation, bleeding. But despair was stronger than fear. There were 2 types of cheeks in fashion: delicate rounded cheeks, a symbol of youth, or clear thin cheeks, a symbol of nobility. If the face did not correspond to these ideals, women corrected it themselves. How to make thin cheeks. 1. Strict diets. Anorexia was very common in the Victorian era, but it was considered excessive delicacy. 2. Rubbing vinegar into the skin. This caused irritation, but gave a reduction effect. 3. The ancient method of drying. Women sat near a hot brazier, hoping that the heat would dry the cheeks. 4. Massage with alcohol and camphor. This created the illusion of clearer lines. How to create rounded cheeks. 1. Homemade blush with beet juice. The juice was applied to the cheeks, but it left spots. 2. Applying protein masks. Egg white tightened the skin, creating the effect of raised cheeks. 3. Wax pads. Some actresses applied thin wax cheek pads under the powder. This was a primitive prototype of contouring. Lips should be soft, pink, naturally puffy, but not bright. Bright red lipstick was considered almost indecent. The following were responsible for the youth of the lips. Methods by which lips were enlarged. 1. Applying cayenne pepper. Women rubbed their lips with pepper. This caused swelling and a terrible burning sensation. 2. Salt. Rubbed salt corroded the skin, but the lips looked redder. 3. Hot water compresses. The heat temporarily increased the volume. 4. Micro-needling. In some salons, the lip was pierced with thin needles to stimulate blood flow. The methods were painful, but the lips were supposed to look young. Methods for reducing lips. 1. Vinegar. It was applied to the lips to dry them out. 2. A mixture of ammonia and lemon constricted the blood vessels, made the lips pale. 3. Powder on the lips masked the natural color. Women were not allowed to have too bright an appearance. This was equated with frivolity. The chin should be softly outlined, not too prominent, not too modest. And women changed it like this, reducing the chin. 1. Hot salt compresses to melt the fat. It didn't work, but it caused swelling. 2. Constantly wearing tight bandages. Women slept in bandages that pulled the chin up. 3. Vinegar massage. Vinegar was believed to dry out, increasing the chin. 1. Wax pads. They were glued to the lower part of the face under the powder. 2. Belladonna for expressiveness. Large pupils distracted attention from the weak chin. 3. Hairstyles that changed the shape of the face. The hair fell in such a way as to create the illusion of a more harmonious line. Today, moles are a unique feature. In the Victorian era, they were considered a defect, with rare exceptions. Therefore, women tried to hide moles. 1. Lead whitewash. Nothing brightened like lead. 2. Chalk powder. It created an unnatural, but even tone. 3. Miniature powder pads. These were small wax circles. 4. Lightening with vinegar. Some women literally pulled out moles with vinegar compresses. This often left scars. Hiding scars. 1. Mercury creams. They ate away the surface layers, making scars lighter. 2. Waxing actresses used this often. 3. Spotty blush, adding color to the cheeks, distracted attention. What was done about acne? Ammonia, bleach, lemon, alcohol, lid. Sometimes it only worsened the skin condition. But women believed that perfection is worth the pain. Asymmetrical eyebrows, eyes, nose, lips, all this was unacceptable. Therefore, there were methods. Eyebrow correction. 1. Threading. The thinnest threads were pulled, pulling out the hairs. 2. Ointments for smoothing, but they often contained toxic components. 3. Tinting with soot. It was believed that darker eyebrows corrected asymmetry. Eye correction. 1. Belladonna. It dilated the pupils and evened out the impression of the face. 2. Applying shadows with LED light. Grayish shades hid the difference between the eyes. Nose and lip correction. 1. Powder contouring. First attempts to create a shadow. 2. Wax pads small. 3. Hairstyles that adjusted the silhouette of the face. Why women took such steps, not because of vanity, but because of fear. Fear. To be unnoticed, to be unattractive, to be less valuable, to be rejected, to lose the chance of marriage, not to meet the standard. The face was a symbol of the future, and women fought for this future as best they could. It is interesting that most men knew nothing about these procedures. They saw the result: smoothness, lightness, tenderness. But they did not see red spots after vinegar, bruises after bandages, swelling after pepper, tears after belladonna. Beauty was a theater, and the actresses are silent. Imagine a woman living in a big London house. She has beautiful jewelry, peach dresses, a long list of responsibilities. But at night, she sits in front of the mirror, touching Mercury cream with trembling fingers. The first weeks are perfect. The skin is smooth, tender, the eyes shine. And after a few months, fatigue appears. Then, insomnia, hand tremors, dizziness, headaches. The doctor says, your nerves are weak. You need rest. You're too sensitive. Nobody asks, what do you put on your skin every night? And so begins the slow destruction of a good life, which no one will take the responsibility to explain. It has rarely been written about. But in the offices of ophthalmologists in London and Paris, there were young women who could no longer read, could not sew, could not even recognize familiar faces. Belladonna dilated the pupils so much that the light burned their eyes. A woman would come home from a ball, happy because her eyesight had been complimented. And in the morning, she could not see her own room clearly. Those who could afford expensive creams suffered slowly, but they had corsets, servants, and doctors. The poor women, seamstresses, laundresses, and shop assistants, suffered even more severely. They had cheaper remedies, crude powders, homemade creams, homemade tinctures with dangerous impurities. In London's asylums at the end of the 19th century, records were preserved about women with yellowish skin, hair loss, cracked hands, tremors, kidney disease. They all worked a lot. But they all also used cheap bleaching powders. Their pain was invisible. The women of the stage, theater, and cabaret actresses used the strongest means. Gaslight was cruel. It emphasized every flaw. Therefore, the actresses used mercury creams for shine, lead masks, boric acid powder, pepper mixtures for lips, high-concentration bleach. They looked stunning on stage. But behind the scenes, they hid fatigue, bruises, headaches. That's why many actresses ended their careers at 30, not because they were getting old, but because their health could not stand it. Often in 19th century novels, a woman is described as fainting from excitement. But this is not excitement. It is a corset. tightly tightened it. Compressed the ribs, reduced the volume of the lungs, impaired blood circulation, pressed on the stomach, raised the diaphragm. Women fainted not from tenderness, but from asphyxiation. Medical records mention displacement of organs, broken ribs, chronic inflammation. But no one blamed the corset. That would be indecent. There are documented cases of death. 1. From lead whitewash, lethal anemia, damage to the nervous system. 2. From mercury creams, kidney failure, poisoning of organs. 3. From belladonna, cardiac paralysis after improper use. 4. From acid in masks, severe burns and infections. 5. From bleach baths. The combination of vinegar, chlorine, and ammonia created toxic fumes. These were isolated articles in newspapers, quickly forgotten, buried under phrases, "A woman was too delicate for this world." No, society was too cruel. In addition to physical tragedies, there were invisible ones, internal ones. In the letters, diaries, memoirs of women of that time, you can find records about shame, about the fear of losing youth, about panic before wrinkles, about the pain from corsets, about loneliness in the struggle for ideality, about the thought, "I am not beautiful enough." Many women lived in a state of chronic anxiety which no one recognized. They were not taught to love themselves. They were taught to meet other people's expectations. Today, we remember those who had no right to weakness. Actresses who disappeared from the stage at a young age. Women from high society who died of nerves. Seamstresses who were poisoned by cheap creams. Young girls who lost their sight from belladonna. Mothers whose hearts could not stand mercury. Girls who smeared their faces with vinegar and chlorine. These are not stories about stupidity or frivolity. These are stories about pressure, about demands, about fear, about the desire to respond, about beauty that became a duty. In Victorian society, there was a clear image of the ideal woman. It was created by male writers, artists, male doctors, priests, magazines and newspapers, the authors of which were also men. According to this image, a woman should be gentle, quiet, reserved, pure, young, chaste, patient, soft in movements, impeccable in behavior, impeccable in appearance. This was not an image, it was a formula that women were forced to meet. If she did not meet it, she did not succeed in society. And a woman's success then depended entirely on how much she met the ideal. Today, we perceive beauty as something personal. But in the 19th century, beauty was considered a moral quality. If a woman was neat, fair, and beautiful, it was believed that she was kind, modest, well-mannered, moral, worthy. And if she had redness on her skin, wrinkles, dark eyes, tired eyes, inconspicuous facial features, then it meant that she was lazy, unkempt, not educated enough, doesn't take care of herself, not worthy of respect. Appearance was a measure of character, and a woman lived with it every day. A Victorian girl grew up in a world of rules, not to raise her voice, not to laugh loudly, not to move abruptly, not to touch her face in public, not to show fatigue, not to show anger, not to grimace, not to squint at the light. She was told, "Keep your back straight, otherwise you will look bad. Don't sit like a boy, it's ugly. Don't frown, wrinkles will appear. Smile modestly, excessive emotionality spoils your features." Even movements were shaped under pressure. Slow steps, smooth bows, quiet sitting, a graceful manner of holding hands. The body was taught to be decorative, tamed, quiet. In Victorian culture, what mattered was not what a woman saw in the mirror. but what a man would see. A woman had to look at herself the way a man would look at her. She couldn't be herself. She had to be an image that someone else would appreciate. Women were taught to lower their gaze, smile without showing their teeth, tilt their heads correctly, keep their hands folded in their laps. All this was presented as attractiveness. In reality, these were lessons in submission. Beauty came at a high price, not only at the price of health, but also at the price of bodily freedom. Women supported each other, but always kept their distance on certain topics. For example, it was not worth admitting that cream burns, that belladonna irritates the eyes, that a corset hurts, that mercury ointment causes nausea, that powder dries the skin. This was perceived as weakness, as a violation of etiquette. Women lived in collective silence. They looked at each other with understanding, but without words, because words could disrupt the delicate structure of self-control and the appearance of perfection. The wider world began to gain access to fashion magazines, and with them came beauty standards, ideal faces, tables of proportions, advice for young people. The magazines wrote, "If your skin is dull, it's your own fault. If men don't pay attention to you, you're not trying hard enough. A woman should look fresh, like morning dew." This created a constant sense of guilt. A woman could do everything right and still feel inferior. Gradually, the external voice of society became a woman's internal voice. Instead of, "People expect perfection from me," it was, "I have to be perfect." And instead of, "I'm criticized," was, "I criticize myself." This was the most profound influence of Victorian beauty culture. Cosmetics could kill the body. In the 1880s, in London, Boston, Paris, and Vienna, a quiet revolution began. Not on the streets, not in the newspapers, not in Parliament, in the women's bedrooms, in the quiet conversations behind closed doors, in the glances in the mirror that said, "I'm tired of pain." Women began to question. Creams that burned their skin, mercury ointments, lead masks, belladonna drops, chlorinated cleaning solutions, absurd standards of youth. This movement had no name. It had no leaders. It had no manifestos. It had only women who were tired of living under dictation. Women who refused cosmetics were called strange. In the diaries of the time, there are entries about women who stopped using bleach or belladonna. They were described as eccentric, too natural, strange, unwilling to uphold the ideal. But most of them were simply freer inside. They said, "If my gaze does not seem large, I will see anyway. If my cheeks are rosy from nature, not from vinegar, it will be my life, not someone else's. My skin has the right to breathe." These phrases sound ordinary from today's perspective, but in the Victorian era, they were almost radical. Women writers were among the first who dared to speak about the real state of things. Their novels featured heroines, imperfect, with natural features, sometimes tired, sometimes with dark circles under their eyes, sometimes with light wrinkles. And for the first time, these heroines were positive characters. Their inner world was finally considered more important than bleached skin. The writers wrote, "Beauty is not in smoothness. Beauty is in truth." Women read them. They read and breathed a sigh of relief. When women finally began to study medicine, the first thing they questioned was cosmetics, which were also tested on them. Doctors wrote, "Mercury creams cause poisoning. Lead whitewash destroys the nervous system. Belladonna is dangerous, even in small doses. Vinegar peels cause skin burns." And although their articles were not taken seriously, it was the beginning the beginning of the science of safe cosmetics. They were ridiculed, they were ignored, but women read their works and thought. In many cities in Europe, small groups of women appeared who gathered in the evenings, brewed herbal tea, talked about their lives, and shared recipes for natural remedies. Chamomile infusions, pink tonics, cucumber compresses, herbal decoctions, honey masks, milk baths. These rituals were not magical. They did not create instant youth, but they were safe, soothing, gentle, natural. Women began to understand that beauty could be painless. One of the important aspects of the movement was the rejection of corsets. The first were governesses, teachers, workers, women with low incomes. They no longer wanted to faint at work. They wanted to breathe. In the newspapers of that time, you can find advertisements. Gathering of ladies who have refused corsets. Free body group. They were ridiculed, calling them unattractive. But they lived longer. They were healthier. They felt happier. At the end of the 19th century, the first cosmetics manufacturers appeared who advertised their products as natural, lead-free, mercury-free, no harsh chemicals. Of course, the standards were far from safe back then, but it was a huge step. The advertising brochures said, "Your beauty should not be a pain, but a joy." This phrase became revolutionary. Here is how the movement was described in letters from women of the time. I stopped using bleach. At first it was scary, but my husband said I looked healthier than ever. I have been off Belladonna for a week. The light hurts my eyes, but I can see better. My skin no longer burns with mercury. I began to understand that I was only myself when I washed. It was not just giving up cosmetics. It was giving up fear. Women began to discover that nature could be beautiful, that imperfection was part of being human, that wrinkles were an experience, that eyes could be beautiful without belladonna, that skin could glow without lead, that a face could be a face, not a canvas. It was a new kind of beauty, peaceful, quiet, without aggression, without pain. A beauty that did not seek to show itself off. A beauty that simply was, take a slow breath, and an equally slow breath out. We have come a long way. Through arsenic, belladonna, mercury, through corsets and lead whitewash, through inner fears and outer demands, through psychological burdens and the quiet female revolution of naturalness. Now this journey is coming to an end, and we will quietly, without haste, look at what is left behind by this era. The mark it has left on women's history, on modern beauty, on the way we look in the mirror today. All those women who hid arsenic in glass jars, applied mercury creams in dim candlelight, dripped belladonna to make their eyes appear deeper, tightened their necks with bandages, hid bruises from corsets, kept quiet about pain, smiled when it hurt. They didn't leave many words about themselves, but their silence turned into a lesson, a warning. They didn't do it because they were weak, but because they had no choice. Because their era dictated, to be beautiful means to be visible, valuable, desired. And although their voices were quiet, they have reached us after centuries. We saw that the Victorian woman's body was corseted, smeared with creams, tortured by procedures, covered with cloth, altered, corrected, disciplined, oppressed. And at the same time, it was something to be proud of, displayed as a symbol of femininity, judged with great severity. The body was not a home. The body was a showcase. This left a deep mark on the perception of women's appearance even today. Although the era has changed, some of its echoes still live on. the fear of aging, the demand to be flawless, the shame of natural body changes, the idea that a woman should conform to a standard, evaluation by first impressions, the cult of smooth skin, the pressure to look younger than she is. It all has its roots in the Victorian era. Their newspapers have become our social networks. Their magazines are our news feeds. Their male gazes are our inner critics. And although the world has changed, the psychological background still has shades of that era. Most modern cosmetic ingredients are safe. But the idea of new U200B's U200B miracle remedies that change appearance instantly was born exactly then. It was the Victorian era that gave night masks, lightening creams, masking imperfections, rejuvenation procedures, the first peels, the concept of perfect skin. And although today all this is done safer, the roots remain. This is a reminder that beauty can be both a power and a trap. But the Victorian era left us with more than just tragedy. It also gave birth to what has become commonplace today. The idea of natural grooming, herbal cosmetics, cleansing with water and mild products, minimal beauty, female solidarity, the first anti-corset movements, the first rules of safe cosmetics, the first female cosmetologists. The women of that era gave us the most important thing, the right to question standards. The silent struggle of Victorian women for their own appearance, their own body, their own right to be themselves, gave birth to a wave that reached the 21st century. It became the reason why today we have safe cosmetics, women's communities, movements for naturalness, the right to say no to standards, the right to be real. And although new ideals sometimes oppress, women now have a voice that Victorian beauties did not have. Imagine a woman, any woman, today's. She stands in front of a mirror. She holds makeup in her hands, but she knows that she can apply it or not, that she can be tired and not be ashamed of it, that she can age and that is natural, that her body is not a project, but a process, that beauty is not an order, but a choice. She is the heir to those Victorian women who whispered, "I want to live and breathe." Their whisper has become today's voice of freedom. We end this journey as we began it, slowly, calmly, with tenderness for those who lived before us, and with gratitude for those who went through pain so that we could live without it. May this story leave a soft echo in our hearts about the power of women, about silence that speaks louder than words, and about beauty that should not be a sacrifice, but a freedom.